Hello, everyone, and welcome, particularly those who are new to Achates Inspires. This is a pre-recorded event, which will first be broadcast at 1 p.m. on the 20th of September. When it is broadcast, there will be Achates colleagues on hand to answer any questions via the chat function, so please do get in touch. To give you some background to Achates and this Inspires event, over 10 years, Achates has provided provocation and inspiration to organisations and senior individuals across the cultural sector, providing expert, market disruptor and inclusive thinking across strategy, recruitment and fundraising. Since 2019, Achates Live has provided practical help and support with monthly sessions for fundraisers in the cultural sector. At a time when the cultural sector faces multiple challenges and opportunities, we feel strongly that leaders need to come together, find solutions, and inspire a vibrant future for the sector. Achates Inspires provides an opportunity for senior leaders to share with those in similar roles, to learn from others within and outside the sector, and to generate new ideas. Achates Inspires provides a cross-arts forum for chief executives, executive directors, and other senior leaders, hearing from expert voices on new opportunities across organisational and creative development and pooling knowledge across the sector. Achates Inspires builds on the art form networks that existed before or as a result of the pandemic and encourages cross-art form cultural sector-wide participation. Achates Inspires exists online to ensure that as many leaders as possible can engage. We also host in-person meetings twice a year, so do sign up to our newsletter for further details. In today's session, we'll be exploring the importance of collaboration, why we need it more than ever, and how to ensure an effective collaboration and what can be achieved as a result. So today, we're delighted to welcome two esteemed panelists, Lucy Davies.
Hello, lovely to see everyone.
And Sydney Thornbury.
Hello.
So thank you both for joining. Lucy Davies is currently executive producer at London's Young Vic Theatre and has been working with the National and Royal Court Theatres to establish a new production centre that will share resources to support the sustainability of our sector. Lucy has previously been executive producer at the Royal Court, was the founding executive producer at National Theatre Wales, executive producer at the Donmar Warehouse, and head of studio at the National Theatre. Lucy is co-chair with Alessandro Babalola of Soho Theatre Walthamstow. She also sits on the boards of Brighton Dome and Festival. She is a creative climate leader, Creative Green Champion 2020, and sits on the Green Committee of the European Theatre Convention. She is also a fellow of the RSA. Sydney is currently CEO and Artistic Director of the Art House in Wakefield, a highly entrepreneurial, creative and strategic arts and social enterprise executive. Sydney is deeply committed to the power of arts and culture to enable personal and social transformation. Originally from Los Angeles, Sydney ran organisations in London for 25 years, including stabilising and downsizing one of the UK's first online arts education programmes in the wake of the 2008 recession, and saving the 134-year Blackheath Conservatoire from foreclosure, before becoming CEO of the Art House in Yorkshire in 2018. Over the last 3 years, the Art House has created the UK's first studio of sanctuary for refugees and asylum seekers called Makey Wakey, which utilises vacant shops in Wakefield city centre to hothouse creative social entrepreneurs. The Art House has also partnered with the NHS and 3 local mental health charities to house Safe Space, an out-of-hours emergency mental health drop-in centre. In 2022, the Art House was awarded the prestigious Calouste Gulbenkian Civic Arts Award. So thank you again both very much for joining. Now, on to our topic of today, collaboration. So collaboration isn't new. Arts and cultural organisations have always collaborated with educational institutions, community centres, grassroots charities and NGOs, the NHS and businesses across art forms and geographical borders, and sometimes even perspectives. More commonly, now we talk about co-creation and co-curation, collaborating with those we're seeking to reach by shifting their involvement from participant to co-creator. As a sector, we seem to be collaborating more, maybe due to funding cuts, the cost of living crisis, and the need to share resources. But if we stop being cynical for a minute, there can also be an acknowledgement that through collaboration, we have the opportunity to create something that's more than the sum of its parts. As a sector, one which holds the creativity of individuals at its heart, we should really be providing leading examples for collaboration. So how do we ensure our collaborations are not surface level mechanisms to achieve more money for a project or a tokenistic nod to power sharing or devolution? How do we use collaboration to ensure we are not becoming siloed as a sector or as a nation? How do we share expertise, give each organisation or individual a platform for their voice to be heard, have their contribution acknowledged, and equally benefit? How do we use collaboration to scale our potential impact for the people we're trying to reach? So I'd like to start by asking both Lucy and Sydney to share an example of collaborating that they've either been involved with or observed, and what the key learnings were from their experience. So if it's okay, Lucy, I'll come to you first. Thank you.
It's so interesting, your questions, your provocations, and your examples of collaboration, which also involve much of what you've been doing, Sydney, kind of stepping outside of the cultural sector, collaborating with other civic partners or government sectors or industries. I suppose the bit I'd like to focus on, or I'm interested in, is when we collaborate as a sector, when we get together with other arts organisations. And you cited that example, Lucy, of the work we're doing with the National and the Royal Court and the Kiln Theatre around this production house. And the other example I'd use is London Theatre Consortium, which is 12 to 14 not-for-profit London producing theatre buildings. We've been working as a collaboration for over a decade, and very specifically around measuring our carbon impact from 2012 to 2022. So that's an incredible data set. So I'm going to talk a bit about those two pieces, which are about theatre companies who are quite similar, have a similar kind of business model and objective, and around environmental progress, because I think that's super interesting. And I think there's real evidence of how we'd have only been able to do it by doing it together. So LTC, that initially began working with Julie's Bicycle around comparing and measuring our data and pulling it all into one report, and then having quite an ambitious carbon reduction target and tracking against it. And that's an incredible 10-year project, which did show significant reduction. And also it was like peer support, like, there was no shame. It wasn't like, we're doing brilliantly, we're not. It was all about how do we hold one another up, how do we share brilliant ideas, super non-competitive, all about making the sector and the world a better place together. Just a brilliant kind of guiding purpose around us. And similarly, I think the work we've been doing, which has been a long time in the conversation with the National, and I began the conversation when I was at the Royal Court, and I brought it here to the Young Vic, around how we can be much more efficient about physical materials and storage. And it's definitely needed the leadership and the heft of the National to really drive that through, but their generosity and the conversations we've been part of for 4 or 5 years have really made it happen. And I hope ultimately that will be something that can radiate to others. So yeah, for me, those principles of we advance when we all advance, travel together and we travel further, and particularly around something like climate, which doesn't lean into our artistic competitiveness or artistic objectives or our boards, or it's a very strategic collaboration.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Yeah, it's fascinating kind of thinking about the within the sector collaborations and where the opportunity is there, as well as kind of how we use arts and culture collaborations with other sectors and organizations to kind of use the benefit of creativity for those to further kind of society or to kind of further the purpose that everyone is kind of driving towards. It's interesting kind of as well, the kind of non-competitive shared ambitions and all driving towards the shared purpose. And I wonder about your kind of thoughts on the need to have organizations, large-scale organizations like the National, in order to kind of have have an impact, or kind of what you think the potential is of versus a group of smaller organizations coming together? Do you think it really relies on those larger institutions?
No, it definitely doesn't rely on them. And if anything, there's a kind of equity if you're all the same scale. But I think I think there's a recognition amongst the big national companies in all of our nations about their sector leadership and about their generosity to the sector. So, you know, we definitely welcome it. But I would say of London Theatre Consortium, that although there's a range of scales in that collective of theatres, there is a kind of equity amongst us, which also feels really productive. I also want to just sort of, particularly the LTC work, and even the production studio, which has sat with technical directors and production managers. A lot of this work has sat with executive directors or executive producers. And I think, again, and I'm just, I guess, augmenting my point about it being strategic projects, is I think artistic directors can collaborate around all sorts of other ideas, but these kinds of pieces where executive directors can really flourish and take leadership that's often a bit not really seen or celebrated, but has proper impact, is just something to note.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, isn't it? We were kind of there is obviously lots of conversation about those kind of senior leadership roles in the sector at the moment, and actually how a forum like LTC provides an opportunity for a kind of network of support and collaboration. I know that, of course, particularly as we were talking about kind of following the pandemic, and you know what Achates Inspires is kind of trying to achieve in terms of kind of bringing together and yeah, providing that network and then establishing areas of opportunity where kind of change and progression for the sector, I suppose, can be delivered by all coming together and creating that support in often what is kind of very challenging, sometimes quite isolated roles within the sector, and with kind of such levels of responsibility for kind of driving forward ambitions and everything. So thank you so much for that. And Sydney, please do share.
Yeah, I mean, I can't emphasize enough what Lucy said about the importance of collaboration and partnership within the sector and also within different areas of the sector. And so there is, I think that, you know, that's been happening sort of in the third sector, in the wider third sector, for a really long time. And I think that in the arts sector, because on the whole, arts sector organizations don't make that connection, that they are actually part of the third sector, so the majority of them tend to not be particularly plugged into like NCVO or the other umbrella bodies of third sector organizations, or maybe less familiar that kind of internal collaboration, that sector collaboration goes on. And so I think it's really refreshing for, you know, and I've watched those developments of sector collaboration quite closely. I think they're fantastic. And I think that maybe they're heralding an era, because I don't think our funding system has been structured until recently in such a way that we were really encouraged. I think organizations saw themselves as much more competitors with one another, instead of finally going, wait a minute, that's crap, we're a lot stronger together, and it's more strategic to fund us working in a collaborative way together, so you get better outcomes from funders as well. So I'm really refreshed to see that happening. I'm not going to talk about that at all. I'm going to talk about our I guess I'll touch on it a bit, but I'm going to talk about our Studio Sanctuary project, which has been what I would call quite an organic collaboration, partnership, and it's not a partnership, it's collaboration. And I think that this is where we basically started the Studio Sanctuary work, because the art house is across the street from an initial accommodation center. We have a tremendous number of asylum seekers in Wakefield, which also happens to be a place that is still 93% white. There's a lot of animosity from the local community very often, because there's a lot of misunderstanding. And we wanted to put the power of art and creativity at the service of creating collaboration between us and those asylum seekers, between the asylum seekers and the local community, between us and the local community. But I have to say, when we started this, we knew nothing about the asylum process. So we knew that we would need a scaffolding of support from others. And so we started collaborating with the local city of sanctuary and with the other organizations that work with asylum seekers and with the people in the urban house, is what the accommodation center is called. And then, of course, with the actual people who we're dealing with, most of who have been traumatized, most of whom have gone, have left everything. And the first step for me in taking on that idea, this collaboration, this project, was to ensure that the buy-in from the team here was like 110%. Because I think that you can't actually have a fruitful collaboration if your full team and organization isn't totally committed to that. And particularly for me, working with asylum seekers we weren't going to do that in a superficial way. We weren't going to do that in a way to just, have funding, because these are people's lives. This isn't a project, right? This is major stuff. Kind of like the climate change work, this is the kind of work that is up there in all important stuff that you can do. So that means that you're going to be asking your team to be really vulnerable and open and exposed and going, having experiences that may be difficult. So I think you really have to set the groundwork for going, if we're doing this collaboration, we're doing it wholeheartedly. And if anyone on this team had said, I don't feel comfortable with this, we actually wouldn't have done it, and we didn't even know what we were embarking on. And I think that's one of the really exciting things about collaboration, when it's done right, is that you do have that little ooh, not really sure what's going to happen here, but really excited about it because you're so committed to the cause, you're going to see it through. And so, the things that we learned from that, is again that you have to have this total dedication to doing this, because in every partnership, in every collaboration, you get lost. There are times when you're like, I don't even know why we're doing this anymore. Maybe because you're really frustrated or something's not going your way, or you've just kind of lost the thread, and you have to go back to that initial commitment. But for us, because this has been, this is such a fast changing sector. I mean, we have people who, will be here for 10 days and then are sent somewhere else unexpectedly or whatever. So we had to be really flexible and also really open to learning, because there was so much that we just don't know. And we ask the people who are coming to be open to the fact that we will make mistakes, and if we all are working closely and in a very human way, that will all work. It's funny, I'm trained as a theater artist. It's my background, particularly in devising. And I think that again, theater is such a great model for collaborative working, because we are trained to work in a collaborative way. We depend on others for what we create. And then unlike, the Art House is a visual arts organization, it's very different visual artists from other theater sector, from theater artists, because theater artists have to engage with their public. We have an audience, we work in collaboration with that audience as well. And visual artists, for the most part, they don't have to do that. Many of them choose to, but they don't have to. So I think I approach this whole collaborative project as the way that I would devise a piece of theater. So, what works we build on, and what doesn't work we kind of leave aside, but we're open and we're communicative, and the information, and we as the Art House certainly don't think that we are presenting people with this project. It is, we all come together in this space and we see what needs to be done, what problems need to be supported, and then we make those things happen. So I think it's very, very much a two-way street, so that you're always in a state of readiness, because there will be all sorts of things that come your way that you can't predict. And if you have that foundation of openness and readiness, then you're not going to react and blow it. So that's probably quite a long, messy way. But what we did ultimately in this organic thing, realized from working with the participants, was that we needed to go then to that next level and start working. So we put together a sanctuary network for all of the organizations working with refugees and asylum seekers in Wakefield, cross-sector, because there wasn't a place where those organizations got together to strategically plan and collaborate with each other how we could best deliver for the people that we were working with. So in a way, that's been very organic and started with, you know, the people and the participants, and it's now gone closer to what Lucy's talking about with, you know, the theater companies working together. That was long, sorry.
Thank you so much. Not at all, not at all. Thank you. That's really.
I really loved. May I just do a response? Really loved hearing about that, Sydney. Thank you. I really loved what you said about readiness.
Yeah,
that feels well, it feels very fitting for the context we're in, right, which is pretty challenging.
oh, yeah.
And I feel like that openness, readiness, agility, experimenting our way forwards, it is sort of got to be our leadership muscle for this period of time. And the openness, readiness piece, it means you're really outward looking.
Absolutely.
And that's where you see, I mean, I said in another thing I did the other day, you know, our risk registers have never been so big, but our opportunity registers are equally big.
Yeah.
And so there's something about, you know, what you've done there in terms of, oh, and now, you know, this is an opportunity to do this, and now it's an opportunity to do this, and that, you know, and you just iterate your way.
Yeah,
forward.
absolutely. And I think that is where the arts sector, you know, and people who have come up through the arts and been trained, you know, this is, I think we take this for granted. You know, this concept of how we create is an incredible resource and skill for us that people in other sectors don't have. And I think we so undervalue it because, you know, we all work the same way. You know, we all were trained in this very creative, iterative process, which is really just about problem solving in a collaborative way. And you know, I'm pretty down on the sector and the state of things at the moment. I agree that there are loads of opportunities, but I think there are loads of problems that need to, you know, kind of fundamentally and structurally be addressed. But even with all of that, I never lose sight of, you know, the real gift that we have as artists and as arts executives of having that foundation of the creative process to fall back on. And that really is a collaborative process, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that the sorry, Lucy, did you want to come back on anything? No. And I think what's so important about what you mentioned in terms of actually what are the qualities that we need for successful collaboration. You talked about vulnerability and openness, and Lucy kind of added to that in terms of agility and the willingness to experiment. And I also think that an understanding of the qualities and the way in which we approach collaboration, as well as the ambition for what that collaboration will achieve, are really fundamental to kind of its success in terms of, and also thinking about the need to learn. And like you said, I mean, even both within and outside our sector where we are forming collaborations, you know, how we are kind of transparent, I suppose, in the ways that we work, having a willingness to adapt to those and other ways of learning, but working, but also our need to really understand the way that, you know, what it is, the circumstances within which other people are working, and how to kind of then best allow for that, but also use that expertise to kind of really bolster the potential for the collaboration. I think those qualities and kind of values with which we approach collaboration are really fundamental to kind of that success. And I suppose as part of that, I was also interested in what you were talking about, Sydney, about how you give the space to those that you're looking to serve, because I was sort of suppose aware that when you're working with organizations and established institutions, and there is an element to which you are kind of trying to figure each other out as well, and work together. And there is obviously a dynamic at play there. But then, like you said, you know, the importance, the kind of fundamental importance of this being people's lives, and the people that you are actually trying to kind of work with and benefit through these collaborations, and how you create that space for those people to kind of have their voices heard when you have these kind of quite established institutions and processes and systems that they will be trying to comply with along the way.
Can I just pick up on that really quickly? When I first started working in the UK, because amazingly enough, I'm not from Wakefield, I worked in education business partnership, and I had this amazing mentor who ran the Civic Education Business Partnership, which was all about putting schools together. It's all about putting schools together with businesses for a variety of reasons. This was under the John Major government. I mean, it was quite a while ago. And she had this great term, which was about being partnership ready, you know, and making sure that the businesses were partnership ready and the schools were partnership ready, because you have to recognize that the cultures of the organizations you're working with are so different. You know, even like in Lucy's world, from the subsidized, you know, from the small subsidized theater sector to the national subsidized, you know, there's such a difference. And I think that what we did at the beginning of that's always really stayed with me. And when collaborations falter, I find that it usually has something to do with what somebody or both weren't partnership ready. You know, we think about what we can get out of these partnerships, I think, or these collaborations a lot before we think about what we give as well, and how we navigate through them. Particularly, like, we have to work with the local authority. We have to work with, you know, different sized arts organizations, different, you know, people in different sectors. And I think really taking the time in your organization to think about how do you make your organization partnership ready for that other, you know, learning about their culture, learning about their way of thinking, their way of being. For us, for me, for that project, it was really about everybody understanding this is going to be hard work. This is going to be emotional work, you know, and we're also not even going to have the answers all the time. So that it was about, now our culture could fit with that. You know, if we were Ernst & Young, I'm not sure our culture would be able to fit with that. So we'd have to find a way to make it work. And I've always loved that partnership ready term. I just think it can guide a lot of this work.
Thank you, Lucy.
I think that's brilliant. And it really invites you as a partner to ask very particular questions of your partners as well, doesn't it? I really like the idea in co-production agreements that you don't just lay out the dates and the terms and the money and things. Somewhere in there you have what are the aims? What do you want to get out of it? What's your intention? You know, because actually, as long as you understand what a partner is getting, you can sort of respect, you get it, and then you know, and that's it sort of makes it bigger, doesn't it? And then I also think partnership invites you individually and as an organization to decenter yourself, and therefore agreeing with all your partners what's in the center that we're all circling around is really important, because and just naming that and acknowledging that, because if one partner doesn't decenter themselves, or, you know, I don't know, or if you can't quite, or if you haven't got clear in your head what your terms of engagement are. In being partnership ready, here are our terms of engagement, here are our aims, what's in the center, off we go.
And that thing in the center is bigger than any one of you. And that the reason that you've put this collaboration together is because you are working to serve that.
And you're absolutely right. The best collaborations are something none of you could do alone. Absolutely.
You make it sound so easy. And so just building on that slightly in terms of how you effectively identify and build new collaborations, is there any kind of particular points that either of you will point to where we've identified the qualities with which you approach collaboration, talk about decentering yourself and having a shared terms of engagement of the kind of way in which what are the aims and how you are approaching. Is there anything else that either of you would kind of point to in terms of really identifying who the potential people might be that would be best for that collaboration in terms of addressing that need, and how you might build that to ensure it's as effective as possible?
Again, Sydney, I really liked what you were saying about checking in with the entire organisation, because a lot of the labour of partnership can fall to other people in your organisation. And so you really need to run it right the way round a lot of time, and keep checking in with your people. Because they are complicated. Partnerships are complicated. You say you make it sound easy, and in some ways they are, but they're also, they need a lot of maintenance, don't they? And a lot of conversation, and yeah, that labour can fall on others. And if they're going, why am I spending all my whole day working on this thing? Or I don't know, so I think that's I definitely highlight that thing Sydney said about checking in. And if anyone at any point goes, I don't want to do it, I don't feel comfortable, it's not within my brief, I think you have to really listen acutely internally.
Yeah, I mean, they're relationships, aren't they? Really, collaborations, and you have to do the housekeeping for that and be committed to that in the same way that you are. But again, it's about being committed to the thing in the center. I think that's such a lovely way to put it, Lucy, like in the center. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, like if I wanted a job, I certainly would not have worked in the arts, it's so we all have that thing in the center, don't we?
What's a job?
Yeah, what the hell is that? And like, what the hell is actually earning money? And like, yeah. I mean, this sounds so, I work in the arts because I get out of bed every day to change the world, and this is the small, teeny weeny way that I can kind of affect and impact that. And so when we're thinking about collaboration, for me, like how do you identify a collaboration? How do you it's because I look and go, what is the problem that needs to be solved, and how can we bring what we do to helping to solve that? And I accept that we don't have all of the skill set to solve all of the social ills, but I think that we have a lot of them. And I firmly believe, particularly with building-based arts organizations, that we have a very powerful role to play at the center of communities to enact civic change in a way that's been really kind of underutilized in a way. Because I think that still so many people think about arts organizations as just being, oh, that's the place where I go to see an exhibition or to see a play or whatever. And I think that we actually can impact the discussion around, health, around housing, around, refugee policy, around empty shop policy, all sorts of things that nobody's ever really come and said and realized that we're smart and creative enough to do that. That's a very long intro into saying that so the way when we start thinking about collaboration, it's not we wake up and go, oh, we want to collaborate with someone today. It's because there's a problem or an issue that we want to help address. And so then going back to the theater thing again, why theater is such a great model is that no director would get up there and go, I'm going to do, well, this is not entirely true, but for the most part, you don't go do all the jobs yourself, right? Because you know that you're not the best lighting designer and you want the best lighting designer, or your thing in the middle, your production is going to be crap, So we're used to working in teams where people are better than us and bring other skill sets that we don't have. So there's an inherent humility in that I think is really beneficial. So if you see a problem, you go, I know I can solve this bit of it. Let me think about who's the best place to solve the other bits. And then let's just approach them and bring that group together and then start talking about how we do that. So I think it's very like, if your collaboration isn't led by that thing in the middle, which I might use forever now, Lucy, so thank you. I appreciate that one. don't do it. You know, this is kind of how I feel. Like there are a lot of things in the middle, whether it's more efficient building running, it's back office support, it's better affecting, you know, the people who are on the receiving end. But it's got to be led organically so that you can then devise the collaboration focused on solving the problem. Does that make sense?
I love your director analogy. And I think also the other thing we're really good at in theatre, probably more than any other industry, if you think about buildings or movies, or is we get things on time and on budget.
Absolutely. Deadlines, like so good. You know, you'd have a visual artist sitting in that room forever if you left them to it. You know, now a theater artist, they got to get out there. The curtain goes up on that day.
We do it. You know, that
absolutely.
We do it, and we've been doing it for 400 plus years. You know, the show goes on. Absolutely. I really love what you said about the director, because if I think about directors, they do have this beautiful combination of vision and no idea, no map. And you're right, it's a thing of going, now I'm going to hire loads of people better than me. I've got something in my head. So you need a bit of both, don't you? I mean, that's a really beautiful combination of things, to have that kind of sense of purpose and where you're heading. Destination, but in between a great forest. And that's how you travel together.
Yeah, so you're searching for your guides, aren't you? And your guides and your like wing people, you know, those are your collaborators.
Absolutely. And I think it's so interesting, isn't it? Because I also really enjoy the director analogy, and the kind of the idea that process, you know, does take a period of time. And even though there is an endpoint objective, there is an understanding of kind of needing to expand out in order to kind of refocus in on and adapt what that original vision was potentially. You know, it's how to kind of drive forward that inspiration, but by being informed by those kind of wider experts and other sources and opportunities and ideas that are there. I think it's interesting because we talk, I mean, there's so much there around how we enact civic change, you know, what it is, how we kind of use collaboration to kind of benefit society, and starting with the problem or issue that we all want to address. I think there's often a misconception sometimes around collaboration kind of easing resources. And we've talked quite a lot about today around the kind of the need to check in with the team and how you kind of resource organizations to embark on these collaborations, and actually the case for collaboration can be potentially quite challenging if you're saying we need more resource in order to do this thing, but that kind of the ability to communicate that ultimately something that's more than the sum of its parts will be hopefully achieved. And I think there is a challenge there, obviously, within a sector and society that is kind of under-resourced, I suppose, and how we really support organizations, because yes, we can get things on time and on budget, and we have a history of that, but also ensuring that kind of duty of care and acknowledging that these things take up a lot of extra kind of time to deliver on. And you pointed earlier to kind of funding structures and more strategic ways of kind of funding work together. And I just wonder, there are kind of organizations such as Take Note and others that have kind of specifically supported collaborations and recognizing the benefit of those. But I just wondered if you had any thoughts about kind of funding and how that could maybe be better utilized or better supported, or better support collaborations, or if there are other opportunities that you think we should be exploring more as a sector to enable collaborations and the additional kind of resource and and kind of costs that often that has as a result in the first instance.
Lucy, do you want to start, or should I, or how would you like to address that?
First, I'm musing.
Okay, I guess I think the first thing that I have to say is that I think that I think the sector as a whole has a phenomenally unsustainable business model that has now been sustained for, about 30 years, and is brutal and inhumane and not effective, and actually just not smart, and doesn't make a strong business case for the value that we actually produce as the entire sector. And collaboration produces better outcomes, I think, for communities and for organizations. And that's why you do it. It's not for efficiencies. Now, you may get efficiencies as a byproduct, and you usually will. The production house is a beautiful example of that. But that, this is not a bean counting exercise. And if you make it a bean counting exercise, then you lose the true value of the work. And I don't mean that in a California airy-fairy kind of way. I mean that in a, if you actually stick with this and you invest the money that needs to happen in the beginning to make this happen, you will realize a return, a financial return on that investment that is not only better than what you would have gotten if you were just funding one organization to do it, but also lasts longer. So it yields for a longer period of time. And what infuriates me is that there is no recognition of that, and there is no policy built on that, even though the evidence exists. So as you can tell, I'm quite serious about this and adamant about it, because I think that we have all accepted trying to live in this fantasy world that there is a way that we can continue to profoundly deliver on a level of resource that doesn't exist. And what the sector is relying on at the moment is that I get out of bed every day to change the world because I joined the sector because I really care, and it's killing us. So it has to change, and we have to advocate for that change, but we can do that in an evidence-based way that even links to a financial return on investment. And that case has got to be made.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amen to everything Sydney just said. I'm so glad you went first. Your question made me sad, Lucy, because that's why I was musing, because I was thinking I don't know how to answer a question that where my brain went to was a fear that we would all, if there were funding pots that said these funding pots for collaboration, we'd all start coming up with collaboration. And I wholeheartedly agree that listen, there are definitely ways where we can probably examine our cost base by looking at resource sharing and collaboration. But you're 100% right, Sydney, that's not the objective of collaboration. And what something like this production house is going to do for us is it doesn't mean you work cheaper, it means you work differently. And that's why collaborations are exciting, because they are system changes. So what you're doing is you're inviting, we will now behave very differently when we get out and fit up and build a show, because we have this production that will do it differently. And sometimes it will cost less and sometimes it won't. But either way, it's better. So it's the systems work and exactly as you say, the long term, thinking beyond 3-year cycles, long term work that is really motivating. And I suppose the thing I always dread is you want funding that supports what we want to do, not that we come up with things that match funding. And I think the more these brilliant, creative, imaginative leaders, not counting myself, I'm thinking about artistic leaders really, or direct, the visionaries that I get out of bed to enable to be brilliant every day, that they can come up with the ideas and that the resources there, for them to realize them. That's That's it. And that's not about entitlement or complacency that we're working within an economic framework. Of course we are. But this divergence currently of our cost and income is getting bigger year on year, and that needs radical addressing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything that you both just said, and I think it's really important that we find the space and the opportunity to experiment, and in order that we can kind of drive the system changes as we talked about, because and I think there is a conversation about how we can, when those opportunities are identified, how we can best support them with kind of resource, with funding, with whatever it is that they need. And as you said, Lucy, it's not about responding to funding, but funding responding to what's needed, and how we create, how we change, maybe hopefully, the funding structures that we kind of sit within to better kind of to better demonstrate, to better affect the change and the impact that we are looking to have, and as a sector, and allow for that. Because as you said, it's not about efficiencies or saving money. Actually, it's about systemic change.
If you instead of saying funding, if you say investment, but in a real way, like nobody in Silicon Valley would not, would go, oh, I want funding. You think, no, I want you to invest in me so I can think and work with the other really smart people around me who think, and so we can create a solution to this problem. And that is what we do as a sector. And so we need to be treated in the same grown-up, respectful way that that Silicon Valley or other business people are treated, because we do come up with solutions for those things. So what we need to collaborate on as a sector, I think, is advocating for that level of investment, so that it doesn't look like cap in hand stuff anymore, and we need to collaborate together as a sector to do that, I would argue.
Absolutely agree. I have nothing to add on. And yeah, I absolutely agree. And we used to talk about investment as and I think that there is more to talk about that from kind of social investment, things like that. But then sometimes the need for return on that investment, and how we allow, the way we talk about our funding structures as kind of funding versus investment, and where that return on that investment comes into financial versus other types of value that you might have, where beyond the economic, and Achates kind of has our 8 types of value that we point towards, as because recognizing that there is more value than just the financial case that can be effectively made, and potentially more effectively made, but isn't the only argument, certainly.
I've been writing a little thing about this morning, about this idea of investment, and exactly to your point about venture capitalists investing in startups because they love the idea. You think you've found the next, and that's what we do as arts programmers and producers, right? We're venture cultural capitalists, and it's about the cultural capital, because we want to grow the cultural capital of our venues and our brand and the UK and the world. And it's exactly that. And sometimes and we have the same relationship with failure as good venture capitalists. Sometimes you lose, right? Sometimes it doesn't work, but you've had an amazing journey, and you thought, and you like the team and all of that. So really reflecting on that a lot this morning. It's timely, but I also think that it's interesting, isn't it, when we slip, how we, as you say, exactly, how do we advocate and use economic language that's when it's helpful to us, but resist it when it's unhelpful to us? And I think treading that line is
absolutely
a key bit of our advocacy skills.
Maybe we're adventure capitalists. Maybe because that culture, I love the idea of that cultural capital, that cultural venture capitalist, but it, and I don't think social return on investment is a watered down thing, but we can't forget there are real economic returns.
One of my trustees talked about this. He said, we can talk about ROI, it can't be return on investment, but we can also talk about dividends.
Yeah, I guess that's the perfect word for that. Absolutely. And when you come together and have a collaborative model where we're treated like adults and allowed to create in the way that we do as artists in collaboration with others, we come up with more efficient and better and more creative solutions. And you know, there's just no getting away from that. So I know that one of the things you were thinking about asking us was this idea of you know, where do you see this kind of collaboration happening? And
yeah, you jumped onto my next question.
Sorry.
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
But it's just Lucy's point was making me think about this, and I really, I mean, you know, I think theater's the best. So I'll be like, well, there isn't any better model than collaboration than the theater. And I think that may very well be true. I go in and tell businesses that. But if there was anything I would look to, I think it would be this idea of the circular economy as an inspiration. And where I think it's being done really well, because you've got, you know, you've got the situation where you play your part in the chain. There's absolutely no waste. And even better, your waste regenerates, you know, so and it's the closest thing to that creative, you know, that cycle of creativity. And so for me, as a sector, if we and you know, as a nation, if we looked at that model, not just about producing goods, but about how we work with each other, you know, so that there is no waste, everybody is playing their part and it's regenerative. For me, that kind of held that idea.
Thank you so much. And yes, Lucy, I mean, in terms of kind of any examples of collaboration or opportunities that you think that we're missing as a sector, is there anything else that you would like to point to?
Nothing concrete. Totally agree with this regenerative idea, but I have no doubt that when we three gather again in 5 years' time, we'll have seen all sorts of incredible things happen. I think we're into the regenerative, circular, collaborative decade. And I'm excited about a generation of younger leaders who are taking over some of our institutions. And I have a feeling we're going to be surprised and astonished by what shakes out over the next 5 to 10 years.
From your mouth to God's ears, Lucy. That's what I say. Okay.
Thank you both so much. I can't think of a better way to end. That's yeah, I'm excited for that next 5 years and what the potential is. So just to kind of recap, obviously, so thank you both so much for such a rich conversation and your thoughts. Yeah, hugely valuable and inspiring. So yeah, really appreciated. Obviously, we talked about kind of qualities that are needed for successful collaboration, how you can support that process, that it's an ongoing process and that requires kind of maintenance, that there needs to be a decentering of each organisation or individual who's part of that collaboration in order to kind of really look at what is at the centre and how you can best support that. We talked about the investment versus funding and the language that we're using and how we and how we ensure that we are able to experiment with new opportunities to generate the long-term benefit, and about circular economy and other opportunities that there may be for as examples of collaboration that we can use, but we're also recognizing that the arts do it pretty well already, so just more opportunities for that. So an Achates colleague will be staying on to chat for the next 10 minutes to answer any questions that you might have, but I really would like to thank both Lucy and Sydney for their time and being so generous with your contributions. At Achates, we can help with offering a strategy, a range of support from strategy, business planning to feasibility studies, recruitment support and development with development positions to CEO and trustee roles and organisational change, helping you both to transform your boards and teams through new hires and development and support pre-existing teams. So the next Achates Inspires will be in October, and there'll be more details to follow. But for now, thank you both, Lucy and Sydney, again for your time.
Thank you. It was a great way to spend the morning. Thank you.
Pleasure to now have a new friend, Sydney.
Yeah, vice versa, Lucy. Thanks. We collaborated.